The air in the grand chamber of the Cathar Imperium was as ancient and still as polished obsidian. It carried the weight of millennia, a silent testament to an empire forged in conquest and now maintained by the unyielding logic of its codex. High Justicar Valen stood before the central dais, his multifaceted eyes fixed upon the shimmering hollow projection that hung in the cavernous space. It was a world of blue and white, a jewel of a planet, yet the image was scarred by fire. Plumes of smoke, visible even from orbit, unfurled from its continents like dark, cancerous blooms. Cities glowed with the unnatural light of destruction. This was not a depiction of a Cathar conquest. This was a record, a fragment pulled from the chaotic data streams of a species that called itself humanity. They had done this to themselves. Around Valen, the elders of the council sat upon their carved thrones of cooled magma, their chitinous carapaces reflecting the grim light of the hologram. Their silence was a physical presence, a pressure that Valen felt upon his own thorax. For cycles they had debated. For cycles they had watched these fragmented, horrifying visions of humanity's past. They had seen its wars, its self-inflicted apocalypses, its cycles of breathtaking creation followed by even more breathtaking annihilation. And now this species, this unpredictable, volatile force of nature, had reached the veil of stars, the guarded perimeter of Cathar dominion. "It is a plague," Elder Kalen's voice rasped, the sound like stone grinding against stone. His mandibles clacked with finality, a gesture of absolute conviction. He was the oldest among them, his carapace scarred from the last of the unification wars, a conflict so total it had led to the creation of the Codex itself, the sacred logic that forbade such chaos from ever again touching their empire. "We have analyzed their history. It is a waveform of pure, unmitigated violence. They build only to destroy. They unite only to find a new enemy. To allow even one of them to cross the veil is to invite a contagion for which there is no cure." He gestured a tri-jointed limb toward the burning world in the hologram. "Behold their art. This is what they create. This is the truth of their soul. The Codex is clear. A species that poses an existential threat through its intrinsic nature must be contained, permanently, before it can fester and spread." Valen did not turn. His gaze remained locked on the projection. He saw the fire, yes. He saw the destruction. But his analytical mind, trained for millennia in the nuance of imperial law and strategy, saw something else in the data fragments. He saw patterns of immense, illogical sacrifice. He saw soldiers dying for ideals they could not touch. He saw art and music of profound sorrow and transcendent joy created in the very heart of the carnage. It was not the clean, cold logic of conquest that the Cathar had once practiced. It was something else, something messier, something that defied the rigid calculus of their understanding. It was chaos, but it was a chaos that seemed to have a terrifying internal purpose. "The Codex speaks of threats, Elder," Valen said, his voice a low, resonant hum that filled the chamber without effort. "It does not speak of assumptions. The data is old, fragmented. It is a ghost, a partial echo of their past. We are judging a species on the evidence of its infancy." "An infancy of atomic fire and continental slaughter," Kalen retorted, rising slightly from his throne. The other elders shifted, the soft scrape of their limbs on the stone floor the only sound. "We are the guardians of 1,000,000,000 suns. We are the architects of a peace that has lasted for ages uncounted. Our stability was earned through the sorrow of conquest, a sorrow we vowed never to repeat and never to allow another to inflict upon this galaxy. These, humans, they revel in it. They have forged a war machine of unparalleled ferocity, aimed not at an external foe, but at themselves. What do you imagine they will do when they discover neighbors, when their endless hunger for conflict finds new worlds to consume?" The question hung in the air, thick with dread. The Cathar had seen empires rise and fall. They had seen species burn themselves out in bursts of technological hubris or ideological fervor. They were the great, silent observers, the stoic gardeners of the galactic order. Their empire was not one of active rule, but of quiet, unassailable presence. They maintained the veil of stars, a sensor and defense network of unimaginable scale to study nascent species, to ensure that no single power could ever again threaten the cosmic balance as they themselves once had. For millennia, nothing had truly tested their vigilance. Until now. "They have sent a single vessel," Valen stated, his tone deliberately measured. He finally turned from the hologram to face the council, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the faces of the assembled. "Bled elders, it is small. It broadcasts a message of peace, a complex mathematical proof of non-hostile intent based on universal constants. It is a gesture of profound intelligence, not savagery. "A lie," Kalen hissed. "A scout, the first drop of a rain of fire. They probe our defenses, feigning innocence. It is the logic of the predator. They will learn of our vastness, our resources, and they will bring their war machine to bear upon us. It is their nature. We must crush them now while they are contained to their single star. A single surgical strike. It would be a mercy to them and to the future." A murmur of agreement rippled through some of the assembled elders. Fear was a powerful motivator, even for a species as rigidly logical as the Cathar. They feared the chaos humanity represented. It was a mirror to their own dark past, a past they had entombed within the cold, hard logic of the Codex. To see it alive and thriving in another species was to see a ghost of their own making walking toward them from across the void. Valen held his ground. He was High Justicar, the final arbiter of the Codex and its chief interpreter. His duty was not to fear, but to understand. To strike a species that has not committed an act of aggression against us is a violation of the Codex's primary tenet. Judgment must follow action, not precede it. We would become the very thing we fear. We would be the savages, acting on an assumption of violence. No, we will meet them. I will meet them. The chamber fell into a profound silence once more. Valen's declaration was a direct challenge to Kalen's position. It was a risk, both for him and for the Imperium. To allow a human, a creature born of such a violent crucible, to approach their throne world to breathe their sacred air was a thought that bordered on blasphemy for many. "You would invite the wolf into the fold, Justicar?" Kalen's voice was low, dangerous. "I would look the wolf in the eye," Valen corrected him calmly. "I would see if it is truly a wolf or something else entirely, something we have failed to understand. The evidence is contradictory, unprecedented self-destruction, yet they survived. They reached for the stars not with a war fleet but with a single open hand. This is not the clean logic of a conquering species. It is something new. We will allow their vessel to approach Cathar Prime. It will be escorted. It will be under the watch of the Grand Fleet, but it will be received with the dignity the Codex demands for a first contact. I will be the one to greet them. I will take the measure of this humanity myself." His gaze swept across the council, daring any to challenge him. His authority as High Justicar was absolute in matters of Codex interpretation. While the council could vote on policy, the spiritual and legal weight of his office was immense. One by one, the elders inclined their heads in a gesture of reluctant assent. Even Kalen, his mandibles tight with disapproval, eventually lowered his head. The decision was made. Valen turned back to the hologram. The image of the burning Earth faded, replaced by a live feed from the veil of stars. A single point of light, infinitesimally small against the vast, silent armada of Cathar defense platforms and sentinel cruisers that had materialized around it. The human ship. It was, as the reports had said, small, elegant, and utterly alone. It moved with a quiet grace, making no sudden maneuvers, emitting no energy signatures that could be construed as hostile. It simply waited, a mote of dust in the shadow of giants, holding its position with a patience that was, in itself, unsettling. For the first time in his long existence, Valen felt a flicker of something that was not logic. It was a deep, cold uncertainty, a sense of standing on the precipice of a change so profound that the very foundations of their ageless empire might tremble. The Cathar had forged their peace in the fires of their own ancient wars, and they believed they had mastered the equation of existence. But as he watched that tiny, approaching light, he wondered if they had only ever read a single page of a book whose true scope they could not possibly imagine. He wondered what kind of creature is forged in a fire that never, ever goes out. The days that followed were thick with attention that permeated every corridor of the obsidian spire. The Cathar Grand Fleet, a force so vast that its very assembly could shift the gravitational tides of a solar system, had moved to form a silent, suffocating cordon around the human vessel. The ships of the fleet were not weapons of elegant design. They were expressions of pure, brutalist logic. Asteroid-sized dreadnoughts of black, non-reflective alloy, their surfaces bristling with weapon emplacements that could crack a continent. They were the physical embodiment of the Cathar's philosophy. Overwhelming, irrefutable force held in perfect, disciplined reserve. They did not main. They simply existed, a wall of absolute power between the lone human ship and the heart of the Imperium. Aboard his flagship, the Unwavering Judgment, Valen observed the human vessel on his private viewing screen. Its design was baffling. It was all graceful curves and soft, internal lighting, more a piece of sculpture than a starship. It lacked any visible weapon ports, any sign of armor plating. Its energy signature was ridiculously low, barely enough to sustain its life support and the polite, repeating broadcast of its peaceful intentions. To the Cathar military analysts, the ship was an absurdity, a lamb walking into a slaughterhouse. They saw it as either the height of arrogance or the depth of foolishness. Valen was not so sure. There was a confidence in its design, a deliberate vulnerability that felt less like weakness and more like a statement. He spent his time in deep meditation, reviewing the human data archives once more. The Council had only seen the curated fragments of war, the evidence Kalen had presented to support his argument for preemptive annihilation. But Valen had delved deeper into the raw, chaotic streams of information they had intercepted. He saw the other side of the human coin. He witnessed a human scientist weep with joy at the discovery of a new particle. He listened to a human symphony that encoded the mathematical beauty of a supernova into sound. He read poetry written in trenches, love letters sent from battlefields, philosophical treatises on the meaning of suffering penned by those who had lost everything. He saw a species that fought and hated with a passion that could shatter worlds, but they also loved and created with that very same intensity. They were not a monolith. They were a paradox. They were a species at war with itself, and in that internal conflict, they seemed to generate an energy, a dynamism that the Cathar in their perfect, static peace had not felt for eons. The Cathar had eliminated internal conflict, and with it, they had perhaps eliminated the primary engine of profound change. Theirs was a society of perfect stasis, of logic so refined it had become a cage. Humanity, by contrast, was a raging, uncontrolled fusion reaction, and it was heading for his front door. Day of arrival came. The human ship which had identified itself as the Odyssey was permitted to enter high orbit over Cathar Prime. The planet below was a marvel of geoengineering, a testament to Cathar order. Its continents were arranged in perfect geometric patterns, its oceans a uniform, placid blue, its weather controlled with absolute precision. There were no storms on Cathar Prime, no geological uncertainties. It was a world tamed, a world made to conform to the Codex. A transport vessel, as sleek and Spartan as everything the Cathar built, detached from the unwavering judgment and moved to dock with the Odyssey. Valen was aboard, along with a retinue of his elite Justicar guard, their ceremonial armor gleaming under the ship's cold, internal lights. He had forbidden Elder Kalen from joining the reception party. This first contact had to be one of pure, unbiased inquiry, not prejudiced accusation. The docking procedure was seamless. The airlock hissed open, and Valen stepped through into the human ship. The contrast was immediate and jarring. The air was warmer, scented with the faint, alien aroma of recycled oxygen mixed with organic compounds. The lighting was soft, yellow-white, mimicking a natural star. The corridor was not the hard, angular design of a Cathar vessel, but a gentle, curving tunnel with walls that seemed to be made of a warm, wood-like material. It felt less like a machine and more like a living space. A single figure awaited them at the end of the corridor. It was a human, a female according to their biological analysis. She was smaller than a Cathar, fragile-looking, with soft skin and no visible exoskeleton. She wore a simple dark blue uniform that was functional yet elegant. Her face was a canvas of soft contours, and her eyes, two forward-facing ocular organs, were a startling shade of deep brown. They were fixed on Valen, and they showed no fear, none at all. This, more than anything, set Valen on edge. To be surrounded by a Cathar fleet, to be boarded by 7-foot-tall armored warriors from a species known for its ancient conquests, and to show no trace of apprehension was a feat of control that bordered on the unnatural. "Hi, Justicar Valen," she said. Her voice was calm, melodic. The Cathar Universal Translator rendered it perfectly, but it could not replicate the subtle intonations, the quiet confidence that resonated in her tone. "I am Ambassador Alara Vance. On behalf of a unified humanity, I welcome you aboard the Starship Odyssey. We come in peace for the betterment of all." Valen inclined his head slightly, a formal Cathar gesture of acknowledgement. "Ambassador, your arrival has been a matter of significant debate within our Imperium. Your species' history precedes you." A flicker of something, not sadness, not regret, but a deep, knowing weariness passed through her eyes. "Our history is a heavy burden, Justicar. We do not hide from it. We have carried its ashes with us to the stars. But it is not our totality. It is merely the fire in which we were forged." "A fire that has yet to be extinguished, it would seem," Valen observed, his voice a neutral hum. "Fire can be used to warm a home or to burn it to the ground," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "The wisdom is in learning to control it. That is the journey humanity has been on. It is why we are here, not to conquer, but to share what we have learned. The exchange was brief, but it sent a tremor through Valen's certainty. Her words were not the empty platitudes of a deceptive diplomat. They carried the weight of a truth deeply felt. He was beginning to understand that the Cathar had been looking at humanity through the wrong lens. They had been judging the fire, not the shape of the vessel that contained it. He and his guard were led to a chamber at the heart of the ship. It was not a bridge or a war room. It was a simple circular room with a large, round table in the center. A panoramic viewport showed the planet Har Prime hanging in the void below, a perfect, ordered sphere. The human delegation consisted of only 3 individuals, Ambassador Vance and 2 others who sat silently, their expressions serene and observant. There were no guards, no weapons. The trust they were displaying was either a profound strategy or a profound folly. "You came alone, Ambassador," Valen stated, taking a seat at the table. His guards remained standing, a silent, intimidating perimeter. "We did," Vance confirmed. "To send a fleet would have been a message of fear. To send a single ship is a message of trust. We trust in the logic of other intelligent species. We trust that you would not destroy a peaceful envoy without cause. To do so would be an act of irrational fear, and a species capable of interstellar travel cannot be wholly irrational." Her logic was flawless, almost Cathar in its precision. She was using their own philosophy as a shield. "Our logic is bound by our imperative for survival, Ambassador," Valen countered. "Your history suggests that you are a threat to the survival of others. We have seen the records of your world wars, your atomic eras, your endless civil conflicts. You turned your own homeworld into a charnel house, time and time again." Vance nodded slowly, her hands resting calmly on the table. "Everything you have seen is true. We are a species born of paradox. We are capable of the deepest love and the most terrible hate. We can create art that can make a soul weep and weapons that can make a son weep. For millennia, this paradox nearly destroyed us. We fought over land, over beliefs, over resources, over pride. We perfected the science of killing each other. Our world was a crucible, and we were both the metal and the flame." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the quiet room. "But a crucible serves a purpose, Justicar. It is meant to burn away impurities, to temper the steel. Our long, brutal history was our tempering. Every war, every act of senseless violence was a lesson. A terrible, costly lesson paid for in the blood of billions. But we learned." She looked Valen directly in the eyes. "We learned that war is a failure of imagination. We learned that conflict is not an inevitability, but a choice. And we learned that the most powerful weapon is not one that destroys an enemy, but one that prevents an enemy from ever being created in the first place. That is the nature of our war machine, Justicar, the one your council fears so greatly." Valen felt his mandibles clench involuntarily. She had named the very heart of their fear. "Explain," he commanded, his voice a low growl. Ambassador Vance smiled, a faint, sad expression. "Our war machine is not a fleet of ships. It is not a planet-killing weapon. We have such things, of course. Remnants of a darker age kept under locks so profound they can never be used again. No, our true war machine is a system, a philosophy, a form of logic so rigorous that it makes violence obsolete. We call it the doctrine of mutually understood limitation." She gestured, and the center of the table lit up, projecting a complex, flowing diagram of interconnected nodes and pathways of logic. It was not a technical schematic. It looked more like a map of a mind. "After our last great conflict, the unification war, our survivors came to a realization," she continued, her voice taking on the quality of a lecturer explaining a fundamental law of the universe. "War is fundamentally a breakdown of communication and a failure of empathy. It is driven by fear of the unknown, by the assumption of hostile intent, by the inability to see from another's perspective. So we built a system to calm that. The doctrine is a comprehensive framework for interaction between sentient groups. It combines game theory, psychological modeling, resource analysis, ethical calculus, and 1,000 other disciplines. Before any potential conflict, we run trillions of simulations. We model our potential adversaries' culture, their biology, their history, their fears. We seek to understand them so completely that we can predict their actions." The hologram shifted, showing a simulated Cathar dreadnought facing a simulated human ship. "But this is not for the purpose of exploitation," Vance said, her voice firm. "It is for the purpose of de-escalation. The doctrine's primary goal is to find a path to nonviolent resolution. It identifies an opponent's core needs, their non-negotiable values, and their deepest anxieties. It then calculates the most efficient way to address those needs and alleviate those fears, making conflict logically unnecessary. It offers a better outcome for them through cooperation than they could ever achieve through aggression. Valen stared at the simulation. This was beyond anything the Cathar had ever conceived. Their codex was a set of rigid prohibitions. It said, "Thou shalt not." This human doctrine was a living, breathing system. It did not prohibit, it understood, and in understanding, it reshaped reality. And if an opponent refuses this logic, Valen asked, the question a test, if they are truly bent on destruction, then the doctrine enters its second phase, containment, Vance said, and the warmth in her voice was replaced by a sudden, chilling coldness. The hologram shifted again. The simulated Cathar fleet attacked. The human ships did not fire back with overwhelming force. Instead, they moved in patterns of impossible complexity. They deployed micro-drones that didn't destroy, but disabled. They emitted precise frequencies that temporarily overloaded Cathar energy systems without causing lasting damage. They didn't fight a war of annihilation. They performed a surgical procedure. They dismantled the Cathar fleet piece by piece, disabling its ability to fight, its ability to move, even its ability to communicate, until it was nothing but a collection of helpless, drifting metal coffins. All with minimal, almost zero, casualties. "We do not seek to destroy an enemy," Vance explained, her voice now resonating with the immense ancient power of her species' hard-won wisdom. "We seek to remove their capacity to make war. We disarm them. We dismantle their infrastructure of violence. We show them in the most logically irrefutable way possible that conflict with us is futile, not because we will obliterate them, but because we will render them impotent. We will not kill them. We will simply stop them." The psychological impact of such a defeat without martyrdom, without glorious death, is a far more permanent deterrent than any weapon of mass destruction. Valen was speechless. The Cathar Council, Elder Kalen, they had all been so wrong. They had seen the fire of humanity's past and assumed they were looking at an arsonist. They had failed to see the firefighter that had been forged within it. The humans had not just mastered war, they had transcended it. They had turned the very concept of conflict into a science, and then they had weaponized peace. Their war machine wasn't a thing of metal and energy. It was an idea, and an idea was infinitely more powerful. You would share this with us?" Valen finally managed to ask, the question feeling small and inadequate. "We must," Ambassador Vance said simply. "We did not come here seeking territory or resources or subjects. We came here seeking partners. We have looked out into the great dark, Justicar, and we have seen that the galaxy is vast and full of wonders, but it is also full of silence. We believe that life is the universe's greatest treasure, and that any species that has survived its own crucible has a duty to protect it." She leaned forward, her brown eyes filled with an earnestness that was more powerful than any weapon he had ever witnessed. "Your Imperium has maintained peace through strength and order. We have achieved it through understanding and empathy. Both paths have led us to this moment. Imagine what we could build together. Imagine the peace we could safeguard, not just for ourselves, but for all the fledgling lives that are yet to awaken between the stars." The hologram faded, leaving the room in a soft, quiet light. Outside the viewport, the perfect, ordered world of Cathar Prime hung in the void, a symbol of a peace maintained by fear. Valen looked at it, and for the first time he saw not strength but fragility. He saw an empire that had stopped growing, an idea that had reached its final, static form. And then he looked at the human ambassador, a representative of a species that had nearly burned itself to ash, and he saw the future. He saw a peace that was not static, but a peace that was not merely the absence of war, but the active, tireless presence of understanding. The fear he had felt was gone, replaced by a profound, humbling sense of awe. Humanity's war machine was real, and it was more terrifying and more beautiful than his species could have ever conceived. Valen returned to the Obsidian Spire a changed being. The experience aboard the Odyssey had fundamentally rewired his understanding of the universe. He had spent his entire existence within the rigid, unyielding framework of the Codex, a system designed to prevent the recurrence of a catastrophic past. He now saw that in their obsession with preventing the past, the Cathar had sacrificed their future. They had built a perfect cage of logic and had willingly locked themselves inside. Humanity, in stark contrast, had stared into the abyss of their own nature, and instead of building a cage, had learned to navigate the darkness. He called an immediate session of the Grand Council. The chamber was filled with the same suffocating tension as before, but now Valen felt it not as a pressure, but as a vacuum waiting to be filled. Elder Kalen was the first to speak, his voice dripping with scorn. "You have returned from the beast's maw, Justicar. Have you brought back its promises of peace? Did it beguile you with its soft words while hiding its fangs?" Valen walked to the center of the dais, his steps echoing with a new, unshakable authority. He did not activate the hologram of human wars. Instead, he let the chamber remain in its dim, solemn light, forcing the elders to focus on his words alone. "I have met the humans," he began, his voice resonating with a depth of conviction that silenced any potential interruption. "And I have looked upon their war machine. You were right, Elder Kalen, to fear it. We were all right to be cautious, but we were wrong about its nature. We were profoundly, catastrophically wrong." He paused, letting his words hang in the ancient air. "We looked at their history of conflict and saw a species of incorrigible warriors. We failed to see that we were looking at the most extensive and brutal training ground in the known universe. A training ground that has produced not the ultimate soldier, but the ultimate diplomat, the ultimate peacemaker." He proceeded to describe what he had seen and heard. He explained the doctrine of mutually understood limitation, not as a weapon, but as a philosophical breakthrough. He described the simulations of de-escalation, the focus on empathy and understanding as strategic tools. He painted a picture of a species that had weaponized not destruction, but reason itself. Their history of self-inflicted violence was not a sign of their savagery, Valen declared, his voice rising with passion. It was the crucible that forced them to evolve. They have a concept they call antifragility, the idea that some systems become stronger when exposed to chaos and disorder. Their society is antifragile. Our society, in its perfect, rigid order, is brittle. It has not been tested for eons. We have forgotten the nature of true conflict. The humans live with its memory every single day. It is etched into their collective soul, and it has made them wise. Kalen scoffed, a grating sound. "Wisdom? They are children, Justicar. Their entire recorded history is but a flicker compared to the age of our Imperium. What wisdom can such an ephemeral species possess?" "The wisdom of the survivor," Valen countered, turning to face him directly. "The wisdom of one who has walked through the fire and emerged not burned, but tempered. Their lifespan is short, and so they live with an urgency we can no longer comprehend. Their history is violent, and so they cherish peace with a desperation we have long forgotten. They have looked into their own capacity for evil, something we have tried to bury and legislate out of existence, and they have chosen to be better. Not because a codex commands it, but because they understand, through bitter, bloody experience, the alternative." He lowered his voice, and it became a current of profound sincerity that flowed through the chamber. "The Cathar Imperium is a monument to the absence of war. We are a state of perfect stillness. But humanity represents true peace, a peace that is not the absence of conflict, but the mastery of it. A dynamic, living peace that is constantly negotiated, constantly understood, constantly renewed. They do not fear chaos. They have learned to draw strength from it." He looked around at the faces of the elders, seeing the doubt, the ingrained prejudice, the fear of the unknown. "The Codex has been our guide for millennia. It has served us well, but it has become our limitation. It teaches us what not to do. It does not teach us what we should do. It has made us reactive, not proactive. The humans are offering us a new path, a partnership, a chance to merge our stability with their dynamism, to combine wisdom of ages with the wisdom of experience." He took a deep breath, preparing for his final, most radical proposal. "I, High Justicar Valen, interpreter of the Codex, do hereby propose that we accept their offer. I propose we form an alliance with humanity. I propose we open our archives, our worlds, our minds to them, and that we, in turn, learn from them. For I believe they are not the threat we feared, but the answer to a question we have been too afraid to ask for millions of years. What comes next?" The silence that followed was absolute, a thing of immense weight and density. The idea was heretical, an alliance with a chaotic, unpredictable, short-lived species. Sharing Cathar knowledge, which had been guarded for eons, it went against every instinct, every tradition. It was Elder Kalen who finally broke the silence, his voice unexpectedly subdued. "And if you are wrong, Justicar, if this is the most sophisticated deception ever conceived, if their doctrine is a lie and their true war machine is waiting just beyond the veil, your proposal would doom us all. It would be the end of our empire, the end of the peace we have sacrificed everything to build." "Then we will have been fools," Valen admitted, his tone even. "But if I am right, and we turn them away out of fear and pride, then we will be something far worse. We will be cowards. We will have let the future pass us by because we were too afraid to open the door. The Codex was written to preserve our species, not to embalm it. The greatest threat to our survival is not the unknown, but the arrogance of believing there is nothing left to learn. I have made my judgment. Now the council must make its own. He stood in the center of the chamber, a solitary figure awaiting the verdict of an empire. The debate that followed was long and arduous. The old fears warred with the new, radical hope that Valen had presented, but his words had planted a seed. The logic of his argument was undeniable. To reject the humans out of pure, unsubstantiated fear would be an emotional, illogical act, a violation of the very principles the Cathar held most dear. Slowly, painstakingly, the consensus began to shift. The logic of opportunity began to outweigh the logic of fear. One by one, the elders signaled their assent. The vote was nearly unanimous. The Cathar Imperium would enter into a provisional alliance with humanity. History was being made not with the clash of fleets, but with the quiet turning of minds. In the cycles that followed, the first tentative steps of a new relationship were taken. The Odyssey remained in orbit, a symbol of the nascent alliance. Small delegations were exchanged. Cathar scientists marveled at the chaotic but brilliant efficiency of human technology, which often prioritized adaptability over the Cathar preference for brute, unchanging perfection. Human artists and philosophers were brought to Cathar Prime, their vibrant, emotional works causing a cultural renaissance among a people who had forgotten the language of passion. Valen and Ambassador Vance met often, sometimes in the formal halls of the Obsidian Spire, but more frequently aboard the Odyssey, in the quiet room with the panoramic view of space. It was during one of these private meetings that Valen felt compelled to ask the question that still lingered in the depths of his mind. "Ambassador," he began as they watched the star-dusted void, "I understand your doctrine, I understand the wisdom forged in your crucible, but one thing still eludes me. Why now? Your species could have remained in its own star system, perfecting its society, content in its own hard-won peace. Why reach out into the galaxy at all? What was the catalyst that drove you to seek us out?" Ambassador Vance's expression grew somber. The usual warmth in her eyes was replaced by a shadow, a profound and ancient gravity that seemed to age her in an instant. She turned from the viewport to face him. "Because our peace was never the endgame, Justicar," she said softly. "It was only the prerequisite. We had to unite our world. We had to end our internal wars. We had to forge our doctrine. We had to do all of it in preparation. We were not coming to meet our neighbors. We were coming to recruit them." Valen felt a cold dread creep up his spine, a primal instinct he had not felt since he was a youngling. Recruit? For what? Instead of answering, Vance said, "Come with me, Justicar. There is something you must see, the true reason we are here." She led him from the quiet room through the warm corridors of the Odyssey to a place deep within the ship. It was the astrogation chamber, but it was unlike any Valen had ever seen. It was a vast, spherical room, and the walls were not walls at all, but a perfect, three-dimensional projection of the entire galaxy. Billions of points of light swirled in majestic, silent arms around a blazing core. It was the single most beautiful thing Valen had ever witnessed. "We have been listening," Vance said, her voice a near whisper in the cavernous room. "For generations, even amidst our own foolish wars, our best minds were always looking up. We built instruments of incredible sensitivity, designed not just to see light, but to listen for the echoes of life, for the faint radio whispers of other civilizations." She gestured to a point on the far side of the galactic disk. "For a long time we heard them, faint signals, chaotic but clearly artificial, the growing pains of young species, much like our own. We cataloged them. We watched them grow brighter, more complex. We dreamed of the day we would meet them." Her hand swept across a vast arc of the star map. As she did, the points of light within that arc flickered and then went dark. "And then one by one they went silent," she said, her voice trembling with a barely controlled sorrow. "A signal would reach a certain level of complexity, a sign of a globally integrated technological society. And then a few centuries later, silence, utter and complete, not a gradual fading, an abrupt cessation, as if a light had been switched off." Valen stared at the map. A huge swath of the galaxy, a territory encompassing tens of thousands of stars, was now a dead zone on the projection. It was not empty. The stars were still there, but the faint, almost subliminal hum of artificial signals that had once emanated from it was gone, replaced by the cold, dead static of empty space. "We called it the Great Silence," Vance continued, her eyes fixed on the darkness. "At first we thought it was a natural phenomenon, Perhaps species reached a point where they transcended radio and we could no longer hear them, or perhaps they simply destroyed themselves just as we so nearly did. But the pattern was too consistent, too methodical. She magnified a section of the dark region. A single star system appeared, surrounded by a faint, ghostly shell of data. This was the last one to go silent, the Eterian Confederacy. We had been decoding their transmissions for 50 years. They were a species of silicon-based life forms, poets and mathematicians. Their signal was a song of prime numbers. It was beautiful. She touched a control, and a sound filled the chamber. It was a complex, layered series of musical tones, a hauntingly beautiful melody that was also a mathematical proof. Valen felt the logic of it resonate deep within him. Then abruptly it was cut off by a burst of pure, chaotic noise, a sound of unimaginable violence. And then nothing, only the hiss of the void. The silence that followed was more profound than any Valen had ever experienced in the Grand Chamber. "The silence is spreading, Justicar," Vance said, her voice now hard as diamond. "It moves slowly, inexorably from the galactic rim inward. It is not a wave of destruction. It is a filter. Something is out there in the great dark between galaxies, or perhaps hidden within the dark matter we cannot see. Something that waits for civilizations to reach a certain threshold. And then it erases them. It hunts intelligent life." Valen felt the foundations of his reality crumble. The Cathar's millennia of peace, their great empire, their precious codex. It was all a child's game played in a walled garden, while outside, a silent, cosmic predator was methodically devouring their neighbors. Their greatest fear had been the chaos of a species like humanity. They had been afraid of the wrong thing. "This is why you unified," Valen breathed, the full, horrifying scope of it all crashing down on him. "This is why you created your doctrine." "Yes," Vance confirmed, turning to face him, her eyes burning with an intensity that dwarfed the stars around them. "Our endless wars were a sin, but they were also a gift. They taught us how to fight. They taught us how to sacrifice, how to innovate under pressure, how to unite against a common foe. They prepared us. They forged us in a fire hot enough to face a darkness that eats stars." She looked at him, her gaze piercing, no longer just an ambassador, but a harbinger. "Our war machine was never meant for you, High Justicar, or for any other species in this galaxy. It was built for that. It was built for the Great Silence. We came here not to conquer you, but to warn you, to ask you to stand with us. Because whatever is out there is coming for us all. And humanity has decided that it will not go quietly into the night." Valen stared at the great, silent void on the map, at the creeping, patient darkness that was slowly, methodically, erasing all life from the galaxy. The petty squabbles of the Council, the pride of his empire, the rigid certainty of the Codex, it all evaporated in the face of this terrible, existential truth. His people had spent eons perfecting the art of avoiding conflict, while humanity had spent its entire existence mastering it, not for conquest, but for the one war that truly mattered, the war for survival. He looked from the terrifying map to the face of the human woman, and he saw not a fragile, short-lived creature, but the distilled essence of defiance, the embodiment of a will to live so powerful it had dragged itself out of its own self-made hell to stand as a shield against the abyss. A new kind of fear touched him then, a fear far greater than any he had ever known. But it was mingled with something else, something he had not felt in a very, very long time. It was a flicker of hope, and the profound, humbling realization that the fate of all life in the galaxy might now rest on an alliance with the very species his empire had been so ready to condemn and destroy. The war was coming. And humanity, the galaxy's terrifying, beautiful, paradoxical war machine, was the only one ready to fight it.